it's true. The pandemic did provide some peace and quiet. It also led to a lot of suffering of a lot of people, and we're not trying to make light of it. But I think it is important to point out that life went on and organizing went on, because we still got the same problems we had before. The climate crisis is real. The clock is not stopping for us. We got to move on it, and we did our best. One of our priorities was to require the state to move on address the climate crisis. The only way that could happen is if there are clear, enforceable goals that the state has to meet to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, because that's what it's all about. We make the greenhouse gas emissions during our regular daily activities, during business. All of our businesses run on fossil fuels. We didn't make that choice. That was set up for us. The fossil fuel companies continue to make money doing that. And so we have to set some goals and targets to move off of fossil fuels and onto renewable energy so that we can live on this planet. It's not really about the planet. It's really about us. We need to live on it, be able to live on it. So there was a law in Massachusetts passed in 2008 that set some targets, but needed to be updated because the science has improved. And we now know we have to move faster. So the legislature was working on this issue. We wanted to pressure them and say, make sure that you address this crisis the way that science requires as much as possible. And you need to do it in a fair way. The people at the bottom that end up paying for a lot of stuff shouldn't have to pay for this change. We all didn't ask for it. So how do we do that? Well, normally you do that by meeting with your legislator, who is supposed to respond to the public. Hard to do that during a pandemic, but we found out that since we can meet by Zoom, we can meet with legislators by Zoom. And the local legislators were accommodating and willing to meet with us. And we met with them. And we asked them the same questions we would have asked in person. And we made the same points. And we coordinated with folks across the state, working with our organization, 350 Mass, to do the same thing. And we trying to make sure that the bill maintained the parts of it that really matter. And then from time to time, we would reach out to people, perhaps like some of you watching, who might be on our mailing list, and said, hey, make a phone call, contact your legislature, let them know you care about this. Because
John,
yeah.
I heard that one phone call is worth 100 votes. Is that true?
At least.
That's what I've always said. I mean, main thing is, if you're part of a group, you know the right time to call. I mean, just one phone call may or may not make a difference, but if it's just before a vote, that's really important. And what John's talking about is critical.
Absolutely right. The legislature hears a lot of time from various interest groups, but they don't hear that as much from their own constituents, the people that can vote for them. And they know that if somebody goes so far as to call them about it, there's maybe 100 other people that feel the same way. I don't know what the exact ratio is, but I know that it really matters. And I've heard that from every legislator I've ever met with, and I met with a bunch of them over the years as an activist.
Well, John, didn't we focus really on one legislator in particular? I mean,
Well, here in Lowell at the time, the chair of the Energy Committee was Representative Tom Golden, our representative, and we met with him a few times over this because he held that position. But meeting with all legislators is important, and I would encourage people to try to do that. Let them know what you think. We have to make our democracy work as best as we can. And one thing we also did was we realized that there is a lot of support for doing something about the climate crisis. The average person really wants to. 5-6 years ago, it wasn't as clear, but I think it's become a lot more clear to a lot of people. And to make that point, we had the idea, our statewide organization had the idea of putting a question on the ballot last November. You recall we had election last year. And there was a lot of important stuff in that election, but we wanted to get a question on the ballot locally and in various parts of the state to advise our legislators that we wanted to move to a renewable energy economy, because that's the way to address the climate crisis, and also along the way to provide equity for people. And so we were confronted with a problem. How do you get a question to be on the ballot? When you go to vote, you've seen question 1, question 2, question 3. Every so many years, you see some questions on there. How do they get there? They get there because the law in Massachusetts allows that if you get a certain number of signatures. Perhaps you've gone to the supermarket and seen somebody standing out there asking you to sign a petition to get a question on the ballot. That's what we did. It's hard to do that during a pandemic. And at first, we thought, well, we probably shouldn't try that. And we stayed out, went out by the river and waited for people to walk around and try to talk to them from a distance, but that didn't work too well.
I still remember having a little basket of pens and having to wipe each one off with alcohol every time someone signed, which really wasn't very often because there was only a few people out.
Right. It was normally it's not hard to get those signatures. People are walking into the supermarkets, et cetera. But with the pandemic being the way it was, we felt a little reluctant to do that. But over the summer, things got a little better. People got a little more used to things. And we figured out a way that we could approach people who might be going into a store from a safe distance, wearing masks. And if people did not want to approach, that was fine, and ask them if they would sign. And many people did. And we got enough signatures to get it on the ballot. We had a few hiccups. Go ahead.
We got way more than enough signatures. We got an extra 200 practically.
Yeah, we got plenty of signatures to get it on the ballot. There's always these issues about whether the signatures match the signature on record, and that can get a little sticky. And we had to actually correct the city because they miscounted the number we had there. But after doing that, we got it on the ballot. And then we wanted to let people know about it, which again would be difficult during a pandemic. But what we did was we printed up some little flyers that would hang on your doorknob, and walked around and distributed them. We didn't knock on doors and try to approach people. We just figured at least they would see that on their doorknob and read it, and they would know about it. And hopefully that would be enough for people to realize, because people genuinely want this. They want climate action. And it turned out to be true. Question passed with approximately 70% support in Lowell. And so after that, we continued working on the bill, the large bill at the State House that we were supporting. And with the help of Representative Tom Golden, who sort of managed that bill as chair of the Energy Committee and did a really good job of getting it through, the bill finally did pass. Our role was to encourage people to call representatives statewide and locally at the key points to show there was support for it and that the key measures that really mattered stayed in it. And if you've ever followed legislation, that can get complicated. But like Neil said, if you have people that know the process, you know when to make the calls, people make the calls, it keeps the pressure on. And the bill passed at the end of the session. The governor vetoed it in the beginning of this session. They passed it again, and they overrode the governor's, sent it to the governor. He sent it back with amendments, and they passed it. They incorporated some of his amendments, but some of the key ones he wanted that would have weakened the bill. Fortunately, the legislature rejected that. Again, we were part of that process in terms of encouraging them to do it and keeping the pressure on. Perhaps some of you helped with that. Briefly, I'll tell you what the bill does. I won't get into wonky details, but it says that we have to reduce our emissions in Massachusetts. Of course, when we talk about emissions, we're talking about burning oil, coal, and gas, fossil fuel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Most of them come from burning fossil fuels. Usually it's dry. It might be from gasoline. It might be from heating. It might be from industrial processes. It might be from creating electricity, depending on how the electricity is created. And the bill says we have to reduce those emissions by 50% by 2030. 2030 used to be far in the future. It's only 9 years away now. But the scientists tell us if we don't get them down, the consequences are going to be severe. They're already bad. They're going to be severe. We have to get them down if we care about the future. And of course, we all care about the future. Our future, humans' future. And then by 2040, it would be 75% and down to what they call net zero by 2050, which means there is either no emissions or we take as much out as we put in. That's what net zero means. And this is close to what the science requires. It's probably a little less. So we may need to update it over time, but it's a step forward from where it was before.
I mean, the real challenge now is to make it happen. I mean, to say that we're going to do it is one thing, and it's legally binding now, but how are we going to do it? And that's where the rubber is now meeting the road. And there's a lot of bills out there, and we've got a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of cause and reason to call legislators and be in the mix here, because it matters a lot for our communities. Just, like Lowell, particular kinds of legislation mean a lot to Lowell because it'll provide good jobs. And it's important to kind of keep up on what's going to make a big difference. We don't want to send all the money to rich towns so they can build walls around them to keep the water out. We want to make it a fair and equitable thing about creating green jobs and stuff, which we can do.
That's an excellent
call
point.
Our legislators.
That's an excellent point. And this bill, one of the things the bill did is it set up a process for dealing with what's called environmental justice communities. Those are communities that historically have paid the price for technology and pollution. Where have the power plants been? Where are the buses parked and idling? And who's getting the asthma as a result and dealing with the toxic waste from the factories or from power plants? And this bill now says that before an energy plant or any kind of facility is sited in a community, if it's an environmental justice community, which is defined as basically low income and communities of color, there's quite a few of them in Massachusetts. We happen to live in one here in Lowell, and it provides rights for people in that community to be aware of it and have input into the process. And like Neil said, now we have benchmarks and goals. What are we going to do to make them real? And we were working on new bills this session that will allow people to retrofit their homes and actually take out the greenhouse gas emissions from their homes, which should mostly come from gas or from inefficient buildings that we live in, these old houses that many of us live in here. And we could talk more about that another time, but that's what I think is going to be coming soon, is let's make this real. Let's make these changes. Let's do it in an equitable way. The federal government is talking about infrastructure, and we want to make sure that that money, that there's enough of it, and that it goes to the communities that need it, and that it creates jobs, and not just McDonald's jobs, but good jobs, and that it does it in a way that actually makes this transition. We need to rebuild our infrastructure, but we need an infrastructure that will allow us to survive. We need to move off of fossil fuels onto renewable energy. And I think Wynn is going to talk a little bit about some of the other local issues that we're dealing with here.
Besides working with legislation to reduce greenhouse gases, the causes of the climate crisis, a process called mitigation, we're also working to deal with the effects locally. This process is called adaptation. The city has already looked into its vulnerabilities to extreme weather due to the climate crisis, and it has pointed out that floods and heat are of concern. Floods cause more property damage, but heat is much more dangerous to people. So right now, 350 is looking at the effects of extreme heat on the city. Of all the extreme weather events, heat is the most deadly. It kills more than all the other extreme types of weathers combined. This includes tornadoes, floods, and blizzards. There are actually 27 ways heat can kill. It can be deadly to children, to seniors. There's actually medicines, psychotropic medicines that some mentally ill people take that make it very hard for them to cool their body down, as is the case with many people who take blood pressure medicine. These are all people who would suffer greatly in a heat wave.
I
if
used
they
to
don't
work
have
in a
access.
setting like that when
Sorry?
I used to work with mentally ill people
Oh,
in a previous job. And that's one thing they always told us when we would go out. It was a hospital I worked in. When folks suffering from mental illness, we'd go out for walks and stuff. They said, well, it's hot. Can't stay out too long because the medicine really, um,
Mm.
uh, the heat affects people more taking that medicine.
yeah, that's fascinating. So there have been heat waves are getting more and more extreme. In 95, there was a massive heat wave in Chicago, and a lot of about 900 people died. And out of that event, some better practices have emerged as to what cities can do to help. So we're looking into some of those practices. Now, Lowell is a city at risk when temperatures rise due to a number of urban heat islands. These are areas of concrete and minimal trees that are significantly hotter than the surrounding areas. The concrete and asphalt absorbs the heat during the day and then releases it in the evening, making the night even hotter than the day. So there is no relief at night during a heat wave. 50% of housing in Lowell was built before 1940. It's not energy efficient and was designed to try and keep heat in, the exact opposite of what we want in the summer. There's little built-in AC in the older housing or in newer public housing. So we need to address the needs of residents who don't have access to air conditioning or may have it but unable to run it due to energy bills. One of the solutions is to open more cooling centers, and this is where 350 has begun our outreach to local houses of worship. Community anchor institutions like mosques are ideal cooling centers, are great places in the neighborhood where local folks can go and get cool. In our sharing this service opportunity with the houses of worship, we also share with them a service that another organization provides. It's a type of energy audit designed especially for houses of worship. It also provides sources of funding for renovation or even putting in solar. Doing this audit can save a synagogue or a mosque a great deal on their energy bill. And to continue with our work with houses of worship, we actually built a website called Green Faith Lowell. Let me see if I can bring it up here.
That's a really interesting website. It's got lots of resources for people of all different faiths about climate and about what we can do about it. It's very interesting.
Okay,
And,
let me bring you up here.
and it's really kind of
There it
amazing
is.
how many different houses of worship there are in Lowell.
Okay, so this is our front page, but the meat of it is under specific faith resources, and we'll bring up, so there's 7: Buddhism, Catholicism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Orthodoxism, and Protestantism. These are all represented in Lowell and surrounding towns, and we have about 90 houses of worship. So let's look at the Buddhism one. These are all resources developed by Buddhists and Buddhist monks to help their members understand climate change in light of Buddhism. And one of the things that we're very aware of is that when you start to deal more and more with climate change, you can become very anxious. And sometimes people lose hope. And we realize that the best place that people can go to reinvigorate is their house of worship. And so we wanted to give tools to local houses of worship to help their people process what climate change is all about. So that's what we've done here. So there's, I think I have 7 or 8 here. And because we have so many Cambodians, we also brought in a number of Cambodian resources. I'm not sure if folks know this, well, maybe someone from Cambodia does, but Cambodia is in the top 10 most vulnerable countries in the whole world due to climate change. It's low-lying and its ability to adapt is very low. So we're very concerned about that. Let's see what else.
Yeah, I've often noted that people who live here, we're actually causing the problem in Cambodia.
What's wrong with that picture? That's so bad, so
We
bad.
have to, we're the ones who can do something about it. In Cambodia, they have to learn how to deal with it, but we are the ones that can actually reverse it or stop it.
Yeah, that's why the global climate conferences are so important. And it's important that the United States not only plays a role and takes part in it, but recognizes our responsibility. Not that anybody going to work for a living asked for it, But it
Right.
fact remains that most of the emissions come from here. And there's people in this country that are getting rich from producing them. Amazingly wealthy, as we know, the inequality has gotten so bad. And
You know,
those
the other
folks
side of that, oh, sorry, John.
they're going to have to, they're going to have to change that up. It's going to cost them, but it should cost them. And what we have no alternative. We're not going to let countries go underwater and become uninhabitable so that somebody can make millions of dollars.
You know, the other side of that is that if we do change, in a lot of ways, our lives get easier. It gets, for instance, it costs much less to heat your house if you put in ductless mini splits. In fact, it costs about a quarter. If you can put in these new non-carbon emitting technologies, and hopefully that's one of the things that the roadmap bill will enable is people to put them in. You spend less, a great deal less, and the other thing is that renewable energy, you don't have to pay for it once it's in. It's actually free. It's as free as the sunlight. So, and a lot of people think that once a country turns to renewable energy, it's like a game changer. It's a new industrial revolution. We're going to be in a different place if we can do this. And yes, somebody has to pay for it, and it's important for the people who are causing, people who are continuing to profit from it, from fossil fuels, stop doing that. And that's kind of what we're about, because changing this whole thing is a very slow and piece by piece thing, and it happens on the ground here in Lowell.
It's true.
When?
I think it would be good if you could explain to us some of what's going on with the pipeline in Lowell. There's some pipeline wants to be expanded.
That's a really good example of what I was talking about turning the Queen Mary. We have these things called public utilities, and you, like me, may have thought that meant that they responded to the public good, but they actually are for profit. And they have, like National Grid has, in the last 10 or 15 years, been making a pile of money on natural gas. And, and they're actually competing, they're out competing the oil people with natural gas. And it turns out they frack it in Pennsylvania with a pretty severe cost to human health. And then they pipe it up here and it leaks all along the way. Now, it turns out that methane, which is what is natural gas, produces at least 40 times as much climate causing gas as carbon dioxide. So if you factor in the leaks, natural gas is actually worse than coal. And they're a self-reporting industry, which means nobody's really been calling them to account. But the studies show it's actually worse than coal, but they're making a lot of money on it. So we have to stop them. And it turns out about 5 years ago, in this bid to take over from the home oil heating, they put in a proposal to quadruple the size of the main pipeline leading into Lowell. Now they also said it was about safety, but the bottom line is they really wanted quadruple the size of this pipeline. And in order to do something like that, you have to get this committee's permission and that branch of the government's permission and this branch. And they went through it. And there was actually people from our group fighting it as early as 5 years ago. And they put up quite a stiff resistance. And after a couple of years, the gas company just stopped. They stopped talking about it and it kind of went away. And then suddenly last year, it came back again. And they had checked all the boxes but one. And that last box was the Lowell Conservation Commission. And they had to present to them and get their permission because they are in charge of wetlands. And the pipeline largely is going to go through, the new pipeline would go through wetlands. And because of, we spoke at those meetings, and also we got a lot of people to show up at the meeting. I mean, we got 30 or 40 people to show up at a Conservation Commission meeting, which is a little bit like watching paint dry. But they were there, and the Conservation Commission unaccountably, for the first time, said no to this pipeline. They said no. And that was a real shocker. Now this whole massive thing is ground to a halt. And of course, they immediately referred it to the Department of Environmental Protection. They appealed it. But they're stopped for the moment. And now what we're doing in 350 is coming up with arguments, wetland arguments, to make it so that the review process will kick in, which would guarantee us another year while they continue to review the pipeline.
I think
And
part of
hopefully, if we can keep it going long enough, they'll finally realize that Massachusetts doesn't want natural gas anymore. The roadmap bill says it's got to go.
yeah, I think
I'm sorry, John.
true that there's no way to do this transition without phasing out the use of natural gas.
Right. Exactly.
But it's also true that the expansion they want to do to the pipeline is going to damage the wetlands and the habitat for creatures around there. And it's really sad to think about that happening for no reason, no good reason. And that's so the Conservation Commission had a point when they voted to deny the permit because they felt that there was significant damage being caused to the wetlands and habitat around there.
Yeah.
And wasn't properly being addressed by the company.
No, you're right. There's a beautiful little wetland pond down at the end where they're going to cross under in 495. It's so easy to miss it. You know, if you go to the theater, you're parking within feet of it, and there's this lovely little wetland pond right behind it. And they wanted to put the pipeline in right next to the pond, and they'd be dumping all kinds of stuff in the pond. And it's a very fragile environment, and they could really give it a death blow, you know, if they're not, you know. So we really hope that the Department of Environmental Protection will consider seriously the damage that they're going to do to this wetland.
So if people want to get involved, either to stop that pipeline expansion or to help address the climate crisis in Lowell and deal with the urban heat island effect, or get the state of Massachusetts to use its collective power to address this crisis, how could they join us in assisting with this?
You know, that thing about one phone call being worth 100 votes is critical, but timing is critical too. And you know, of course, we'd love it to have people work and helping us do all kinds of things. And if you want to, please do. But the very simplest and most wonderful thing you can do is to email us at lowell@350ma.org. I'll repeat that, lowell@350ma.org, and give us your email address. And once in a while, when it's really needed, when there's a meeting in front of the DEP and we want to get 50 people to chime in and say, you know, send an email, say, I care about wetlands, then we'll send you an email. And if you can respond to that, it would be so helpful. Or legislation, like the kind of things John was talking about. All of these things that can use your help.
Yep, we're going to need to approach the city on the issues that Wynn was talking about.
And other ones too.
And there's lots of ways that we can make this transition happen and that we have to do it. So I hope you'll be willing to join us in that. We have meetings every couple of weeks. You're welcome to participate if you want, but whatever level you've got, it's all of our problem. We all got to be part of the solution.
That's great. Well, I think we did get a lot done during the pandemic. It was, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
We did.
We can't let that stop us. We just
Nope.
have to keep moving, and we're going to keep on going.
Well, happy Earth Day. And let's make the next one even more happy.